Hey, freak! Bring the coffee over, but don't spill it with those burned hands! A man in a suit shouted, his voice cutting through the quiet morning diner in Charlotte, North Carolina. Every eye turned to the black waitress, her scarred hands, steady, unshaken. No one could laugh when, beneath her sleeve, the edge of a faded tattoo peeked out. What made a former SEAL, sitting in the corner, freeze speechless at the sight of it? And who was she? Really? Don't leave yet. The best part of the story is still ahead. If these first moments have already made you pause, then hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly feel what I'm sharing here. Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see someone join us from all corners of the world. Rochelle Barnes, 36 years old, had worked at Charlie's Diner for 4 years. Every morning, she arrived on time, carefully adjusting her apron, stepping into the familiar space where the smell of frying oil and the clink of plates never stopped. She was the server few remembered by name, but always by face. Regulars spoke of her with lazy assumptions. A scar running along her wrist made many raise curious brows. One guessed she'd been burned in a gas stove explosion. Another swore domestic violence. They told stories, laughed loudly, as if she wasn't standing there. But Rochelle heard every word. Their laughter, meant to be harmless, echoed in her mind like warning sirens. She didn't respond, never had. She poured coffee, wiped tables, cleared dishes, and stayed silent. A habit forged through discipline. But beneath that quiet shell was a machine of memory, not just in her mind, but in a real device. A small phone in her apron pocket, set to record. Rochelle didn't just remember, she documented, not for instant revenge, but for preparation. Every slight, every jeer, every moment they unleashed their disdain became data. No one noticed. They saw only a black woman, a waitress, with rough hands and expressionless eyes. They didn't realize her silence was a weapon. Their own carelessness handed her the advantage. Rochelle needed little, just time. Each week, the same group of customers, the same table, the same script, men in suits, talking loudly, laughing arrogantly. They spoke of their employees like inventory. They discussed firings, company image tweaks, and ways to legally mask discrimination. All laid bare before someone they didn't see as a threat. But Rochelle heard it all. She memorized company names, job titles, even their proud boasts about carefully documenting firing reasons, avoiding race or gender issues. She even noted the times of each conversation. Every word was a brick in a plan no one could predict. Rochelle didn't rage. She was clear-headed. She didn't wait for rescue. She built her own defense. In her mind, everything was ordered. The scar on her hand didn't come from cooking or a brawl. It was the remnant of a failed mission overseas. A vehicle exploded as she pulled teammates from a fire zone. She survived, not by luck, but by discipline. And that discipline still held her steady in the civilian world, a place sometimes crueler than any battlefield. No one knew she'd been a combat medic. No one imagined someone like her had once dragged teammates from machine gun fire, because now she was serving coffee, silent, unassuming. They didn't know, and they didn't care to know. But Rochelle never felt small. On the contrary, she knew their underestimation was her greatest weapon. She didn't need to shout to prove anything. She just needed to stand there, quietly, preparing for the moment everything would shift. She moved from table to table, eyes quickly scanning faces, ears catching snippets of talk. Beneath her white uniform, a faded tattoo of a special unit remained. A piece of another life. A life she'd never left behind. When a customer laughed loudly, thinking they'd pranked a waitress, Rochelle only smiled faintly, not because their words held worth, but because she knew. Every second they thought themselves safe was a second they were writing their own verdict. Martin Clay wasn't one for roadside diners, but that morning, an odd urge pulled him into Charlie's Diner. He stepped inside, chose a quiet corner in the back, ordered black coffee, no sugar. The table wobbled slightly, its surface scratched, but that didn't bother him. He'd lived long enough to know. Appearances never told the whole truth. He took a sip of coffee, then saw her, Rochelle. Petite frame, hair neatly bunned, steps slow but deliberate. A black woman working as a waitress, nothing remarkable. Until she poured coffee for the next table. Her uniform sleeve shifted, and in that brief moment, Martin saw it. The edge of faded blue ink, a tattoo that might seem ordinary to outsiders, but to him, it was a bolt of lightning. Devgru. Just 3 letters, but enough to stop his heart. He set his cup down, his hand tightening slightly. How could he mistake it? That unit wasn't for ordinary people. It was the gathering place of the sharpest, the toughest, those who carried out missions the world never knew, and if it did, would never believe. SEAL Team 6 was the shadow within shadows. No one entered or left it easily, and no one bore that mark on their body unless they'd crossed the line between life and death. Martin had served in another branch, had run joint ops with Devgru. He knew that tattoo wasn't just ink, it was blood, a vow, a testament to things no outsider could grasp. And this woman, Rochelle, carried it quietly, neither flaunting nor hiding. She just existed, as if being part of that darkness had no bearing on her life now. He watched her closer. Upright posture, eyes never wavering, steps without hesitation, movements so precise they seemed instinctive. Something in how she held the coffee pot, how she scanned each table, each customer's face. It all spoke of someone trained, not just to serve, but to survive, to assess, to react in the harshest conditions. She didn't talk much, but her actions spoke volumes. Not the fawning service of pleasing, nor the reluctance of duty, but a resolute presence, a being that made you realize she knew exactly what she was doing, where she was, and why. Martin felt a pang in his chest. He'd met people like her, after wars, after missions never recounted. They slipped into civilian life, like smoke vanishing in a crowded room. But he'd never seen anyone with her gaze, not hardened, not bitter, but calm, as if she knew she could do so much more, but chose not to. A deliberate refusal of the power others couldn't fathom. He didn't plan to approach her, didn't want to disrupt the peace she'd built with her silence, but the urge in him grew clearer. She shouldn't be forgotten. She couldn't be defined solely by the job she held. He lifted his coffee again, but this time the bitterness tasted different. Memories flooded back. Dark nights, helicopter rotors, blood mixing with mud, shouts choked by comms. He'd seen teammates fall, had known someone pulled him back from death's edge. People like that, they didn't deserve to be called Waitress. He took a deep breath. She didn't need him to speak up. She might not even want to be recognized. But he knew one thing. He'd never see her like the others in this diner did. not with pity, but with respect, the kind she deserved more than anyone. For months, Rochelle Barnes quietly did something no one at Charlie's Diner could have imagined. Amid the calls for orders, the clatter of dishes, and the repetitive chatter from customer tables, she opened the recording app on her phone. Every day, when she pulled the phone from her apron pocket to check an order or send a quick text, she was actually pressing record. A silent, discreet, precise habit, like a pre-programmed maneuver. No one noticed. No one suspected a thing. She didn't do it out of spite or petty revenge. She did it because she understood the value of truth, when preserved correctly and timed perfectly. In the wars she'd survived, it wasn't the strongest who won, but the best prepared. At this diner, Rochelle had heard all kinds of cruel words, but what happened every Tuesday truly sharpened her focus. That was the day Gary Wilson and his group of businessmen came in. They always sat at the corner table by the window, always ordered the same food, always carried the air of men who owned the world and the right to decide who belonged in it. Gary was the kind of man who didn't hide his arrogance. He spoke brashly, laughed loudly, gestured broadly, as if he were in a boardroom. Each time Rochelle brought coffee, he'd pause for a moment, glance at the scar on her hand, then smirk. A wordless laugh, enough to diminish someone's dignity with just a look. He had no idea, while he boasted about deals, about restructuring strategies. Rochelle was listening, memorizing, recording. What he carelessly let slip, to her, were bricks building evidence, rigged contracts, discriminatory firings, strategies to push undesirable employees out with legalized excuses. Every word carried weight. Gary had been featured in the local Forbes magazine, a symbol of success. But right here, in this small diner he deemed beneath him, he exposed himself. He thought Rochelle didn't matter, just as he thought the employees he ousted from his company left no consequences. But Rochelle forgot nothing. She remembered every name he mentioned, every company he bragged about optimizing, every tactic he flaunted like a trophy. Those sounds, to him, were moments of self-satisfaction. To her, they were warning signals. Each night at home, Rochelle uploaded the recordings to her personal computer. She didn't listen to them right away. She stored them, organized by date, tagged by voice, and noted with content summaries. The work happened in silence, in the dark, shared with no one. Because she knew the time wasn't right yet. Revenge, if it came, was never rushed. She didn't need to win at their game. She just needed to wait for the moment to lay all her cards on the table, not to crush them with one blow, but to let the world see a complete picture, one they'd painted themselves with their own arrogance. Gary didn't know the diner where he hurled insults was the stage for his approaching downfall. He didn't know. Each time he raised his coffee mug and laughed after a workforce cleanup story, it was another moment his voice was preserved forever. Rochelle didn't expect anyone to believe her. She didn't wait for someone to defend her. She needed only one thing: justice not forgotten. And for that, she was willing to wait, willing to collect every piece, every breath, every word, no matter how small, because she knew, beyond the spotlight of corporate success, were dark corners that needed light. And when that day came, no one could say, "We didn't know," because they'd said it all themselves. And she, a waitress no one noticed, had heard everything. Dear audience, take a moment to relax, grab a glass of water, and keep listening to this story, with surprises still to come. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see someone join us from all corners of the world. Comment 1 if you're loving this story, so we can keep bringing you more like it. That Wednesday, Gary Wilson arrived at the diner in an unusually jubilant mood. He'd just closed a major deal, and he made no effort to hide his glee. As usual, he chose the table by the window, plopping into the chair as if the entire place were his personal domain. He glanced at Rochelle wiping a nearby table, then leaned toward a colleague, whispering something that made the whole table erupt in laughter. Moments later, when Rochelle brought the coffee, Gary pulled out his phone. He spoke loudly enough for everyone around to notice, his camera aimed at her, his voice clear and deliberate. "This is the freak waitress serving our coffee." His face didn't hide his amusement. The table laughed again. A short video was posted to his Instagram soon after, captioned with mockery. He didn't think much of it. To him, it was just a joke, a fleeting bit of fun. But Gary had no idea. He'd just lit the fuse on a bomb Rochelle had quietly built for months. Before, she hadn't spoken out. She'd collected, observed, archived. Now, with the moment ripe, she needed only a spark, and Gary had unwittingly provided it. Less than 30 minutes after the video went up, Rochelle responded. No insults, no venomous retort, just a simple post. Gary's video, paired with a short audio clip. In it, his familiar voice, brash and unguarded. He bragged about cleaning up payroll, removing unfit employees, and especially how to legitimize firing black employees to make it look lawful. Those words needed no commentary. They spoke for themselves. The post's reach exceeded all expectations. Within 6 hours, social media was ablaze. The hashtag #justice. For Rochelle trended rapidly. Posts dissected the video. The audio was quoted. Legal experts weighed in. Journalists began digging into Gary's background, his company's deals, the employees let go in restructurings. Contracts were canceled that same day. Partners who'd once shaken Gary's hand went silent, or announced they were reviewing ties. Some publicly cut relations to avoid the fallout. While Gary scrambled, confused about what was happening, Rochelle quietly stepped back from the social media storm. She said nothing more, didn't capitalize on the sudden fame, didn't seek the spotlight. But her image appeared in thousands of posts, videos, news reports. An ordinary woman, filmed to be mocked, had used that same tool to flip the game. No shouting, no violence, just perfectly timed silence and meticulously stored evidence. They called her the silent hero. Journalists described her as a new symbol of patience and intelligence. Advocacy groups reached out. Those who'd faced discrimination realized they weren't alone. Rochelle became an emblem of justice from the margins, from those no one noticed. At Charlie's diner, crowds grew, not for the food, but to see her in person. Rochelle worked as before, same steady hands, same cool gaze. But now, each step she took drew eyes filled with respect. She didn't need to speak. People looked at her and saw what they'd overlooked for years. Strength didn't come from loud voices, but from silence forged with resolve. As for Gary, his name was now tied to disgrace. His media appearances were no longer about promoting business, but facing hard questions. The video he thought was a joke had become his own indictment, one he'd crafted himself. Rochelle didn't celebrate, didn't revel in victory. To her, it wasn't a victory, it was balance restored, a truth, long disrupted, set right, and she was simply the one who put it back in place. Charlie's diner was no longer just a diner. It had become a sacred place, where people came not only for coffee or classic barbecue, but for something harder to name: reverence. The atmosphere shifted, not because of a new menu, but because of one woman, once invisible in that very space. Rochelle's image in uniform was no longer just an old memory. It was enlarged, printed beautifully, hung proudly on the diner's main wall, beside soldiers who'd once served the nation. But among them, only one had fought to reclaim her honor, not just on battlefields, but in everyday life. Not with guns, not with orders, but with a patience no one could have foreseen. She was no longer the woman who bowed her head, wiping tables, avoiding customers' eyes. She still served, but the gazes on her now were different. They saw her as a living symbol of the quiet strength society often overlooked. No longer a victim, she was a survivor. And from that survival, she'd built something many couldn't achieve in a lifetime: true impact. After the video that shook the internet and spread across platforms, Rochelle didn't choose to hide. But she didn't chase the spotlight either. Instead, she appeared just enough for her voice to reach where it needed, enough to spark dialogue, to affirm that those once cast aside didn't have to live in silence. Veterans conventions invited her to speak, not because they needed a battlefield hero, but because they needed someone who knew battlefields existed not just overseas, but within systems, where power could sacrifice self-respect. Rochelle shared her experiences without embellishment. She spoke with truth. No anger, no shouting, just the clarity of someone who'd walked through darkness. Civil rights groups contacted her, seeking her input on internal policies. She didn't accept every offer. She chose only those truly committed to change. To her, not everyone chasing a polished image deserved what she could offer. Rochelle knew her worth, and for the first time, she wielded it as a rightful power. Martin Clay, the man who'd recognized her tattoo, now stood by her side, not as a helper, but as an extension of her mission. He didn't claim credit. He just kept going. Together. They founded a small organization, but one with big ambitions, to help veterans reintegrate into civilian life with practical tools. Not just a pamphlet or a therapy session, but a network of connection, training, empowerment. They called it simply Ground Station. Rochelle didn't sit in an air-conditioned office. She kept her morning shifts at Charlie's, still wore the uniform, still carried coffee, still wiped tables. But each step she took, each nod when customers thanked her, carried a new layer of meaning. Because she didn't serve out of necessity. She served because she chose to stay, so those who'd witnessed her journey could see. Dignity wasn't in titles. It was in rising after being knocked down. On weekends, Charlie's began adding a new wall. They called it the Silent Honor Wall. On it were photos, not of generals, but of soldiers, victims, workers, women overlooked. All shared one thing: they'd survived, stood up, and never backed down. Rochelle always paused before that wall at the end of her shift. She didn't look at her own photo. She looked at the other faces and saw a community slowly awakening. Gary Wilson was now a shadow of himself. A name once spoken with respect among local business circles, now lingered only in old articles, under scandals, not achievements. Divorce. A lost company. Assets crumbling with each audit. Public apologies on air couldn't calm the outrage. Handshakes from the past vanished. His phone no longer rang with partners, only lawyers and reporters. When everything collapsed, Gary couldn't grasp why a single video could destroy the career he'd painstakingly built. But what he never saw was himself. It wasn't the video that killed Gary. It was his true self, exposed too clearly, too raw, too late to retract. One overcast afternoon, Gary returned to Charlie's diner. The place was unchanged, familiar tables and chairs, customers coming and going, no one recognizing him. Or rather, no one cared to notice a man who'd once shamed the town. He sat in his old corner, where his laughter used to drown out the music. Now, only silence and haunting remained. Rochelle emerged from the counter. She'd seen him enter, but finished her tasks before approaching. Her face showed no emotion, no anger, no mockery, just a stillness that made him feel stifled. Gary looked up, speaking in a voice lowered, as if he'd swallowed a stone. I just want to say, I'm sorry. Rochelle met his eyes. No flinching, no probing. After a moment, she replied, her voice even, low, more a statement than a reaction. What happened between us wasn't a misunderstanding. It was your nature revealed. Not a word wasted, not a word missing. It was a sentence Gary couldn't forget, not because it cut, but because it was true beyond defense. He bowed his head, stood, left the diner, lighter in body, but heavier than ever in spirit. He wouldn't return. Rochelle's story spread beyond the diner, beyond the small town. 3 southern states began discussing how veterans were treated in workplaces. Lawmakers reviewed policies, heard testimonies from those quietly pushed out for their military past. Her name appeared not just in news, but in policy briefs, in state delegates' speeches, not because she demanded it, but because she deserved to be named. A TV network invited her for a special interview. The host asked what kept her from anger, from striking back as others might have. She sat there, calm as ever, no elaborate makeup, no polished persona. And she answered, brief, as always, but resonant long after. Respect shouldn't be something people fight for. It should be what we give each other by default, as humans. The studio fell silent for a second. No fanfare needed, no background music. That statement alone forced anyone who'd ever dismissed someone for their job or appearance to question themselves. After that day, Rochelle took no more interviews. She returned to where she began, Charlie's. She still served, still arrived on time, still meticulous with every cup of coffee. But now, each step she took was more than action. It was a quiet declaration of dignity, of surviving with integrity, needing no bestowed title. Rochelle's life didn't need applause. What she left wasn't a victory, but a reminder. Never underestimate someone just because they're silent. In this world, there are scars no one sees, and quiet strengths only time can prove. Her story isn't just about justice, but about awakening, about learning to look at ourselves before rushing to judge others. Out there may be hundreds, thousands of Rochelles, working, enduring, holding on to dignity in silence. And perhaps, one day, they too will rise, not for revenge, but for change. If this story resonates, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass it on to friends and family in the US. It'd be amazing to know where you're watching this from, and what time it is, so we can see how far this story's journey reaches.